Hey there, welcome to the More Miles podcast. I'm Lauren,
I'm Scott.
I'm Michelle.
and we are the More Miles Run Coaching team. We are not here by ourselves today. We have a special guest. We are here with Anne Shubert. Anne is a section hiker and trail and ultra runner and an alcohol-free trail runner. And we are here today to talk all about her story. She's also been a member of the More Miles Run Coaching team for almost 6 years, not quite. But that's not anywhere near where her story starts. So, Anne, thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Lauren. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, so like I said, your story starts nowhere near where we met and where you joined the More Miles team. So let's go way back and start with obviously, we know you as a runner, and we're going to get to that part of your story. But let's go all the way back. Like when did sport and athletics first enter your life? Were you a runner as a kid? Did you do other activities? Where did you start?
Way back machine. My my father was the head football coach for our high school. So, and I was born in August. So I started with athletics at 3 weeks.
Okay.
I was bundled up in a football stadium watching the games. But so athletics has always been a part of my life. My dad was an athlete. My mother was not, but she was supportive. And I would say as like youth sports, there weren't really any female sports at that time. Like there was no, like girls didn't play Little League. There wasn't soccer. I was in a small town in Pennsylvania. So my first organized sport was probably a youth track league that another football coach started. He saw that there was an opportunity to grow. It was like during Title IX, so there was like an opportunity to involve more girls in sport. So they started a youth track league. I was probably in like fifth grade, something like that, fifth or sixth grade. And I was a natural at sprinting and hurdling. So the first thing they threw us around in all the different events and said, can you jump, can you sprint, what do you do? And I had a natural 3-step hurdle on the 100-meter hurdle. So I was immediately thrown into the into the hurtling crowd.
That's awesome.
And
I didn't know that you
yeah,
hurdled.
it was cool. So, and it ended up that class, we had, I'd like tie into Scott's story a little bit. We had a really good class of track athletes. So I ended up second in states in the 100-meter hurdle. Our 4x4 relay team was at states, and so we had this really great experience with track going through. I ran cross country to stay in shape. I hated it. I was okay at it, but I hated it. I didn't like having to run that far. So, yeah.
And look at you now. That's funny.
And look at us now. Yeah, so it just really had really good experience with running. I was recruited by a couple colleges, but at the time, my parents were going through a divorce, and I wasn't really sure where life was going to take me. All I knew was that I wanted to go away to school. So I went to Millersville and as part of their track team, but made it not even halfway through the first semester. I don't know. I did. I guess I went through indoor track. I made it to indoor track, and then it was just like I was more interested in having fun at college and the dedication that it took to be a collegiate athlete wasn't happening for me at that time. So running fell off the radar at that point for me.
So how long it fell off the radar freshman year of college? Were you still active or involved in sport in any capacity for, into early adulthood?
Not really, no. I got out of school, got married very young, And the the sports that I was around were more as a attendee, like football fans, basketball fans, but nobody that I was around was athletic or endeavored to be athletic. I ended up working at Foot Locker, so that was sort of like my way to stay around athletics. And like it was always in my mind that I was an athlete, but I wasn't participating. Every once in a while I would go out and try and, see if I could run a half a mile, or, it would just sort of be in my mind, but wasn't part of my life at that point. Yeah. It was probably a good 20-year break.
And Anne, so from a hiking perspective, how did you get into that? And where did that hobby kind of enter your life, and how did you get motivated to pick that up?
Yeah, sure. So first marriage ended. I was, not happy in any aspects of my life. So relocated to Maryland. That I was in the Philly area, and then moved out here to the Frederick area, and sort of was exposed to whitewater kayaking. Was exposed to hi doggy. Was exposed to mountain biking. I was close to the trails. Like I had this, and I downhill skied in high school, and I really liked that. So I was sort of like this adrenaline junkie athlete, but I wasn't having any opportunities. And the whitewater kayaking I ended up not liking because I was scared of the big water. I could roll my kayak and do all the things, but I just didn't like it. And then mountain biking, I wasn't really finding community, and it wasn't safe to do it alone. I went over my handlebars a couple times by myself, and that wasn't really working out. so running was chirping, but I still wasn't running. And I ended up reading a book. It was called Solo. It's not in print anymore, but it was a collection of short stories about women doing solo adventures. And I also read Jennifer Farr Davis's Through Hiking biography, Becoming Odessa. And those two books really sort of inspired me to see what women do on their own, and that is something that was like in my mind, a possibility that I could probably do myself. So living close to the trail, I just started, like literally was in my backyard. I could walk out my backyard and get on the Appalachian Trail. So I just started going for walks, and those white blazes caught me.
So tell us a little bit more about that, because you've done some pretty interesting and inspiring things as a hiker before even taking the plunge over. Tell us about some
Yeah.
of the
So
stuff that you did.
so the solo book sort of planted the seed of being, doing something kind of big solo, but I was not really confident enough to do that. So that my little day hikes, and just like little 2 and 3 mile hikes, behind the house, like Raven Rock, between Raven Rock and 77 was sort of my section. And for those who are familiar with the Maryland AT. So I just sort of did that for years. And finally I was turning 50. I had started doing some 5Ks and 10Ks, and had sort of gotten back into running a little bit, but still wasn't doing anything long distance. But the AT was just calling my name, and I was getting close to 50. So I wanted to do something big for my 50th birthday. So I decided I would go on a 50-mile solo hike on the AT, self-supported, just backpacking by myself. I had never spent the night on the trail. I had never spent the night in a tent other than, camping in my 20s. So it was sort of this kind of big thing for me to do. And I spent a year training for that. This is 2018. So I spent a year. I mapped out a plan. This was before I knew and was working with Lauren. So this is the year before ultra running. So I took the backpack and did an overnight on the 18 near my house. I did one trip to the fish farm where my husband works, and just sort of real safe places that I could carry everything, test my gear. And then on the week of my 50th birthday, my husband drove me to Front Royal, and I hiked to Harper's Ferry. And that
How many days and nights?
I was on the trail 3 nights. 3 nights. And it was funny. When I was training for that, I had sort of entered into the awareness of trail runners and was sort of in a circle of, the Frederick Trail Steeps, and sort of knew some of those people. And one person, when I told them what I was doing, asked if I was going to do it in a day. It's like, no, this isn't a run. I don't trail run. That's not my thing. This is, I wanted to backpack. And so that was my big first long distance, all day on my feet. I was doing 15-mile days with 30 pounds on my back and finding my own water. It was really like so empowering. It was.
What was the hardest thing you overcame on that trip? Like, what was there, like some big challenge physically or mentally where you were just like, because it seems
mentally,
like a soul searching, finding kind of trip there.
It was totally a soul searching trip. Yeah. It was all about empowering and showing myself that I could keep myself alive for 3 days all by myself. Imagine that. So the hardest thing was, it was August. It was hot. And the third day I was out of water. I had 2 smart water bottles. Actually, they were on my hip pack. And then I had a Gatorade bottle lashed to my straps. And all 3 of those, so I had 2 liters of bottles and a electrolyte. So this was plain old water back in the day, imagine, before I knew you guys. I had run out of water, and I knew that there was only one water source between me and camp that day. So that was the most stressful day on the trail. And I was worried that there wouldn't be water. And if there wasn't, what was I going to do? But there was, so it all worked out. And I was close enough. I was in Northern Virginia. So I just kept telling myself, I'm very close to civilization. This is not, by any means, I'm not up on the Continental Divide or out on the, Pacific Crest or anything like that. I'm not up on some 14,000 footer. I'm in Northern Virginia. I have signal. I have, everything I need. So it was safe, but it was a big challenge. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
I'm always intrigued by through hiking and long weekends or 2-3 days. Did you plan out, those days, or did you just wake up and that day gave you what it gave you and you just kind of enjoyed it? Or was there more planning kind of into it?
There was so much planning. I'm a planner. So I planned and planned and planned and planned. And I did like all the research on where the water stops were and where the shelters were and where the road crossings were and all of that. And then I sort of figured out what my days might look like in a perfect world. And then gave myself room that if it didn't go well, what shelter would I end up at, or where, so I sort of planned for the good and the bad. And it really set me up. I had no idea that it was such good setup for ultra training. Like it really helped, get to those, if you're in a bad place, what's going to happen moment. Right.
When was that turning point when you went from, I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, with the planning, did you get good weather? Did the weather cooperate with you?
It, so cooperated. It was the hottest week of the summer, but it was a really, it was rainy and all summer. And that week it didn't rain at all. It rained enough that I had to put my raincoat on and then take it right back off. So that my biggest worry was getting wet and not being able to get dry. But
so was this like the turning point where you decided to try ultra running? Because you're saying like this prepared you for it. Was that like something that you came out of this trip with that intention of starting?
I don't know if it was an intention at that point yet, but it certainly was in like my conversation. It was in my realm. I knew that I knew people who were doing 50Ks, and I had seen people trail running when I was out training for my hikes. And I remember I was like, there is no way I'll ever trail run. That's not for me. I was 5K, 10K, half marathon. We're good. That's all I need in my life. And, I don't know, I guess, I don't remember exactly how I started. One of the steeplechasers had an introductory to trail running group run, and at Little Bennett, and I showed up. I had my hydration vest because I knew trail runners wore hydration vests, but I didn't. I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, fumbling and awkward. And like, they were all these women. It was all girls. So I felt safe there. And I was just like, I felt really out of place and really weird. But the woman who hosted the event took it upon herself to stay with me the whole time. And she just talked up trail running like it was the best thing since sliced bread. And I was sold from that point forward. It was a 4-mile run on the trails. It was the hardest 4 miles I ever ran in my life. I didn't know that you could walk, like road runners run. We power hike and trail running. So yeah, that was the transition.
So what made you take that jump then from your first trail run with the group was 4 miles, and then later the same year we connected. You came to me with this goal to run your first ultra marathon. It was a trail 50K. So what gave you that inspiration from 4 miles to let's try 31 trail miles and see how that goes?
I think the 50 for 50 hike planted this seed that I could do something 50 related every year of my 50s. And so the next thing, I don't know why I didn't go for like 50 rounds of golf or something, but the next thing that popped into my head was a 50K. And I knew like I wasn't ever interested in a road marathon. Like it didn't sound appealing to me. It didn't tick any of my liking outdoors, being in the woods kind of stuff. It really had no attraction whatsoever. But like I said, I'd been exposed to some people who were starting to do this long. I think that the year that I did my hike, there was a group of people from Frederick who did the Dam Yeti in Damascus, a Jason Green Yeti Trail Runners event. And so I'd seen them do that. And there was another group that did a North Face 50K. And so just sort of, starting to be exposed to a community that looked interesting and attractive to me. Like I hadn't found with kayaking or mountain biking, or, this community was intriguing.
So it's intriguing. You kind of jumped right into it. What was the most challenging part of your first, I guess, step into the ultra world?
I don't know. I think I might have been naive, and it went really well. Like it kind of did. I trusted Lauren. I had heard really good things about her, and I had done some training plans before that were on paper, not personalized. So when I got the final surge, personalized paces and distances, and really, like I said, I'm a planner. I love plans. So to have it laid out in front of me took all the stress out of that planning so that I could just go do the work. And I just trusted it. I trusted the process, and it all worked out. So lucky me.
So you did. Well, it's not luck. You worked really hard, and it was a smooth progression, but don't discount yourself there in the hard work that you invested into it. So Blues Cruise 50K
was hard.
Oh, go ahead. Well, that's what I was going to get into. Blues Cruise 50K was your first ultra, your first 50K, longest trail run at that point. Tell us a little bit about that experience, the race day experience.
Okay. Yeah. So we had, in parallel with the training that I was doing with you, there was a steeplechasers 50K training group. And so there were tons of us there. There were probably 15 or 20 or even more of us that were there. So there was all kinds of great support. It was really fun in that regard. And so I was like super stoked to go out and have a really great 50K. And as they say in the ultra world, it's all fun until it isn't. And then it gets fun again. So my first 8 miles were, can I swear? Can it be?
You're fine. We just put the E. Yeah.
I had, I was eating real food, which I had trained for. So my gut was very happy with real food, and it was fine. But the first aid station had like breakfast burritos. Bad decision. So the breakfast burritos took their revenge for the next 8 miles. And I was running with a friend. We've trained together. Um, she was, she didn't sign up for the race until the very last minute, but had trained with me all summer. So we were in it the whole way through together. So she stuck with me through the first half of the race. I think it was like mile 13 until my gut finally settled down. But I can remember sitting at the aid station that I was closest to a cutoff, and I looked like Scarface. Like I was using UCAN starch at the time, so I had UCAN starch all over my face. I had my vest was off. I was like a pile of just. It was a disaster. And thank God for my friend. She's like, let's go. It's time. We got to get out of here, and put me back together, and off we went. And like it settled in, and everything was fine after that. But oh my God, it was not.
Now, is this a trail race? Is this kind of a combination of road trail? Okay, so a trail race. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So
and it was warm.
You
it was
finished successful 50K on the books. Tell us about what came next, like where you were from that very first 50K. This was, like we talked about, just over 5 years ago. It was fall 2019. To where you are now. What you've done along the way, and you just accomplished some big things this year also. So let's cover kind of all of that.
So that's 2019. So we know what's coming, right? The next few months are the pandemic is upon us. And so I had and still have a full-time job working in an office in Frederick. Got sent home. I was traveling. I was on the West Coast the first week that the bug hit America. And then, got sent home. All the running communities sort of all went virtual. Everything was like as weird as it could be. We all remember. And I was like, what can I do for this next 50? What's the next 50? So, the logical jump, from a 50K is 50 miles. So I signed up and trained for JFK during the shutdown year. And so benefited from having that freedom, to go out and put the miles down without having to think about being in the office and all that stuff too. So did JFK, had a really good experience. And at that point too, this is sort of where you talked about being an alcohol-free trail runner. So this is sort of where my alcohol awareness and my healthy lifestyle started to intermingle. Before Blues Cruise and before JFK, I was cutting out alcohol in my lead up to the event, so that I was, really focusing on clean eating, really focusing on getting, hydrating, and I knew that if I cut out alcohol, I was going to feel better. Like I had become aware enough about that I was just so leading up to JFK 2020, the pandemic edition, with wave starts and buffs and minimal aid stations and all that, cleaned up the alcohol for the 30 days before that and had a really good experience with that JFK.
So then what? Tell us a little, elaborate on that a little bit more. How did you feel like alcohol was maybe tied into your life at that period of time, both just personally, also maybe in the trail and ultra community and the running community at large?
Right. So in the Wayback Machine, when I was, talking about my parents going through a divorce, that was when I started to consume alcohol. I was 14 years old. It was part of society, part of my lifestyle, just so from a very young age until, a couple of years ago, alcohol is a part of my life. And it was, I always say, like, it was never really what you would society defines as problematic, but it became a problem for me as far as like how it affected what my goals were and how I was feeling. And so it I always have trouble explaining how it, because society sort of has this definition of what a problem drinker is, that, you know, you sort of have this, like, you give yourself the excuse of being able to, you know, well, I don't have a problem with alcohol, so I can keep drinking. But it was like totally interfering with my goals at that point. Like, I didn't feel good. My sleep was terrible. I would decide to not drink and then drink. And so that was sort of just like becoming more and more aware. And of course, the trail and ultra community, you know, just like society, I thought that I wasn't like ignorant that it wasn't there, but I thought that maybe a healthier community, you know, minded like athletes wouldn't be drinking as much, but it's everywhere. You know, it's any sport, any business, any, you know, it's part of our society. So and of course, because I drank alcohol, I found the drinkers, right? So like the pub runs, and, you know, I had Fireball in my vest for the JFK. I didn't drink any of it, but I had it with me. So like it was just part of the scene. And I was in 2021, like after the 2020 JFK, I celebrated with an IPA, and then between November and that January, I sort of fell back into really drinking a lot. I think the pandemic, everybody was I say like pandemic empowered, right?
It was like airport
totally.
time. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, I was drinking a lot of wine, drinking a lot of beer, but still in my mind, it wasn't problem drinking. It was just...
It's interesting. It's, you know, like, it was like a year ago. I remember my mom sending me a study, and you're talking about the trail running community as like, you know, you have drinks together. And my mom sent me a study, and I wish I had saved it just for today, that they did some research that endurance athletes generally drink more than the average population, which you would 100% not think that. You know, you think this healthy, you guys can run for 50 miles or a marathon, but it's such a part of the culture of like, I finished, I deserve to have this, I deserve to have that. Yeah, it's 10 a.m. Why not? Like, you know,
totally.
Even down to 5Ks you finish. That's like the first thing they hand you at the finish line is a beer. And
yeah,
it's such an interesting like dichotomy that exists in such a healthy community, that we have this that's also like a bonding experience.
Right.
You know?
Right. And I started to question all of that. Like I started to question why. Like, if I feel this bad, why am I doing this? You know, like, so, and I think that the empowering parts of my journey with the hike and with the solo stuff, like I started to have more confidence around making my own decisions. You know, I didn't, you know, I was drinking to fit in. I was drinking to be a part of the crowd. And I think we all do that. You know, everybody's celebrating, and you don't want to be the one person that doesn't have champagne in their glass, all that stuff. But then, like, do you really?
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah, so to go back, you mentioned that you started to remove alcohol leading up to JFK 2020, and then afterwards the celebratory IPA, and back in. Can you talk about maybe some of the things you saw from performance running, kind of just how it impacted you? Kind of looking back
For
and forth.
sure. I have a screenshot. I wish I can probably find it. I have from when I was drinking to when I stopped, the stress levels and like on your Garmin that shows your stress. It's unbelievable. Like I was spiked orange all day long, all night long, 24 hours a day, high stress, like just completely stressed out. I stopped drinking, down it went, and you guys were talking about the HRV on the last podcast, and my HRV like completely changed my nervous system, like completely. And it took some time. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't like 30 days later. And my nervous system was, but I've had depression. I've had like debilitating anxiety. I've had all sorts of nervous system related stuff my whole life. And never once did anyone say, do you drink? Like here's, go to therapy or go, take a antidepressant or, whatever. But never did anyone say, how much alcohol do you consume? Because then if we start questioning that, then we have to question all of society. And then it sort of goes down the smoking path. But from a, like, what did I notice? I noticed, I felt calmer for sure. The anxiety and the depression, sleep. I sleep like a baby. I can fall asleep. I can sleep through the night. I don't have any like 3 o'clock wake up in a panic or a sweat kind of thing anymore, which I did for a long time.
Yeah.
It's so funny because you're talking about like how no one ever asked you like how much you were drinking. And I remember like conversations every year, our physical, my physician would ask like he would always ask, how much do you drink? And I would tell him, like, especially during the pandemic, well, it's a little higher than normal these days, or whatever, a drink or two a day. And he said, drink or two a day, that's great. No problem. Like, that was his response, is that was great. And looking back, he said, as long as you keep it under 10 drinks a week as a woman. And when you sit and like think about that, I mean, that's a glass or two a night. So that's 3 nights of 2 drinks and then a drink the rest of the days. That's a lot. That's just, they don't even view that as not an issue necessarily, but that it could have some detrimental effects. That was like the healthy range. As long as you were under 10 drinks a week, he could care less.
It's normal.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the conversation as a whole, but also your story specifically, Anne, is kind of this message of you don't have to have a problem to want to quit. And right. It is so ingrained in our running culture, in our society at large, that drinking is a normal, healthy, acceptable thing. And the level to which a lot of people drink, like Michelle said, 10 drinks a day is considered, or not a day, sorry, a week.
That might be an issue.
A day might be an issue. That's normal. That's healthy. It's okay. Like we would not classify that as a problem. Especially, if there aren't obvious signs that it's interfering in your relationships and your job performance, that sort of thing. So tell us, classifying yourself as a normal, regular drinker, not someone who had a quote unquote problem. What was the point that you decided to make a long-term change? I mean, you talked about, going alcohol-free before a big race. I think a lot of us can relate to that. But what was the point that you decided to commit for a longer term?
Yeah, I think during that stretch between the 2020 JFK and that new year, I think it did become more than just a glass of wine at night, mm-hmm. or a couple beers on the weekend. It did become something, and I'm not going to say that it was just that stretch, because I binge drank, on weekends since my 20s. I'm not going to deny that by any stretch. But I never really considered that a problem. I think that there's that justification that we have that's okay, that's normal drinking. But for me, I had felt so good so many times leading up to these different events that I just decided that enough was enough. And I think I was starting to become, I don't know if it's because of, searches that I was doing on the internet or what, but I was starting to see, and maybe it was also just because of the pandemic, but there was a lot of sober curiosity conversations going on at that point where people were starting to realize, holy crap, I'm drinking a lot of freaking wine and now I can't stop. So there was a lot of conversations going on at that point that were in my field of vision that looked like different conversations than the traditional approach. Like, it wasn't just, you're broken, you have a problem, you'll never be fixed, and you're going to have to live with this for the rest of your life. Like that, I had no interest in that. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel diseased. I didn't feel allergic. I didn't feel any of that. I just felt like I drank too much and I wanted to stop. So there were conversations going around. There were different people, writing books, having podcasts, all these different approaches that gave people permission to just want to quit drinking for the sake of quitting drinking and not having to have a definition or a label around that. And, I'm not saying that those approaches aren't good for people, but that just wasn't going to work for me. So, yeah, so I started getting coaching, and just sort of started having, was my mindset coaching, really, just in sort of questioning beliefs around, is alcohol a reward? Does alcohol make me more fun? Does alcohol help me sleep better? Does alcohol help me relax? Like, all these things. Do they really? And it came back no every time if I really started to question it. So it was really interesting. It was good.
So tell us a little bit more about that. I think most people are familiar with programs like AA. And I think we tend to put a stigma on things like that. That's not the method that you used. Tell us a little bit about the method that you found that was most helpful for you.
Yeah, I think, like my journey into ultra running, a community was really a big part of it. So I read a book called This Naked Mind, and just everything about it rang true for me. Like the approach that the author, her name is Annie Grace, the approach that she took and the stories that she told were so relatable to me. And she was in corporate marketing. She was an executive. She traveled the world, and it was the booziest experience. And I related to all of that. That was sort of my life. I was not in marketing, but I was in the business development group, and I was out, at all trade shows and events and corporate boozy life. And so her story really rang true with me, and her approach, and it's the approach I've actually gone through and gotten training on to be a coach for this method. It's all mindset. It's all really just, it's looking inward and asking questions, and it's all like brain chemistry and neuro pathways, and laying down, rather than at 4:00, the first thing that you do is go to the fridge and look to see what's, what IPA is available today. Make another decision, distract yourself. And, so there's just some good technique around, neural pathway, laying down new neural pathways to break those habits and set yourself free without having to, like you say, have a stigma or have a label, and be free. I really do not even think about alcohol anymore at all.
Did that take time? I mean, what I think about is, if I can relate to it from just like a societal standpoint, right? And running, and there's not just the celebratory part of that after you finish a race or whatnot, but just the social part of it, right? Whether it's pub runs, whether it's weekends runs, whatever. Did you find it hard to make that shift from a social standpoint, if we're tying the social and running together, or did that take time to kind of get used to, if you don't mind kind of delving into that a little bit?
That was one of my biggest fears, because I had found these friends and found this community, and it was absolutely, finish the run, open up the cooler, sit on the bumper, shoot the shit for 30 minutes after the run, and drink the beer. And I was so afraid that I was going to lose those people and that community, because I really had become very important to me, that, I had sort of found my thing finally. And I did start out not going, and then I was like, this is not what I want. I don't want to, separate myself. This isn't the goal. The goal isn't to isolate, and not drink. I want to be a part of society. So I actually, this is the same time that all the NA beers started to show up. So I'm like, well, let me try to take an NA beer with me. And so I took a 6-pack of Athletic Brewing, put it in my cooler. I have a cooler with all sorts of labels all over it, all my stickers from all my events and everything. It went with me everywhere I went, and usually full of beer. And so I just brought an Athletic Brewing and opened it up and hung out with everyone. Not one person asked what I was drinking. Not one person asked, so it was just like that experience alone was like, they don't care about what you're drinking. They don't care that you're drinking. They just care that you're there to have fun. And that's like, the ultra community is so open and giving, I think, in that regard. Like I was very scared and worried that I was going to lose my friends. And
Yeah.
And it to prove it, like you sort of have to prove to yourself that because you do convince yourself that you're cooler when you drink, and you have, you say more funny things and all this stuff. Well, maybe not really.
Are there like some key like tips or like things that you like leaned on to get through those times where you kind of felt like, I feel like I should have a drink, whether it was a holiday or after a run where it might have gotten challenging, that kind of pulled you back to your why and got you back to staying sober?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I did early on, if I was going to be at some place where I thought I might decide, to drink, is that I always said I can drink anytime I want to. And that sort of freed me up. It was like, it was never this never thing for me. It was like, you can, and that's just, I smoked for years and years and years. I smoked a pack of Marlboro Reds for 15 years. And I quit smoking the same way. I put the pack of cigarettes on my counter and I said, you can have a cigarette anytime you want to. Just don't want to. And so that's like sort of with how I did it with drinking, was you can have a drink anytime you want to, but do you really want to? And that worked for me. Another thing that worked was I set up reminders on my watch for like every 20 minutes. I put little positive quotes so they would show up on my watch. I'd set it on my alarm on my phone, and it would show up on my watch and say, be here now, or you're a badass, or you got this. Sort of the same stuff that we tell ourselves at mile 36, right? You got this, you can do this. When you're having a hard time, you can do this, you can do this. And like you said, remember your why. So, your reminder on your watch could be something about tomorrow. If you want to like play it forward and think about, is this one drink today going to improve anything about tomorrow? Or how do you want to feel tomorrow? I had horrific hangovers, so I used hangovers as a good play it forward.
I think it's interesting, we're talking about how ingrained alcohol is in our healthy, active endurance community. And a lot of the mindset tricks that we apply to training are similar that you can apply to not drinking. I've got to do this today so that I can take the next step toward tomorrow. So I'm better tomorrow for what I did today or didn't do today. I think that translates pretty well to this community, but we don't necessarily behave that way in our life outside of running, outside of the actual miles and the actual training. I think you, at the time that you began this process, you are the first person I knew, at least publicly, outward, who is sharing this stuff, that decided to go alcohol free without having a problem. I kind of, that stigma was in my head that if you were getting sober, it was because you had issues. And I think a lot of us, even if maybe we do have a little bit of that going on, don't want to admit that to ourselves. Somehow going sober is an admission of that. But you talked a lot, you used this term called clear-headed, that you were feeling clear-headed, and that was sort of a difference that you felt with long-term abstinence that maybe you don't feel by, staying dry for a week or staying dry for 2 weeks. It's sort of, I hear you talking about changing your neural pathways, changing your habits, and there really is a different effect to staying alcohol-free long-term as opposed to just short stints. Tell Tell us a little bit more about how long-term abstinence can affect, I don't, let's maybe take a dive toward performance. We're all runners here, and that's sort of our community. So let's take that dive toward endurance sports and performance. What kind of benefits can someone see from longer term, not just stopping for the 2 weeks before their race, but over time?
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder about the clear-headed. I remember distinctly looking for the chaos. Like, I was like, why? I feel calm. I don't understand why life used to be so crazy and wild and weird, and like there's nothing going on. And not in a boring bad way. It was just like everything just came down. It was really nice. But like some from health related stuff. And I have notes in front of me, so if I'm looking down, I just wanted to like make sure that I got it
We
right.
do too. You're
Well,
fine.
first of all, hydration. I mean, like, enough said. It's a diuretic. We want to be hydrated all the time. We don't, 30 days out is great, but like, let's just be hydrated. Your liver, alcohol is a toxin. It is like, whether it's bourbon, beer, wine, whatever you're drinking, it's all ethanol. It's all the same chemical makeup. It's all ETOH. If you look at, the chemical symbols are all the same. It's just flavored different and fancy so that we love it, but it's toxic. So your liver is going to try to eliminate it first, and it's going to miss all the other stuff. So as runners and athletes, we're like putting all this, good stuff into us that we want it to, we want our liver to metabolize and fuel us and, get our red blood cells happy and all the stuff. And it's too busy working alcohol out of your system to process. And it's going to slow recovery, so if you celebrate with your IPA, you just slowed recovery down because you're processing alcohol rather than inflammation. And you guys are the experts on that. But
Well, I think both of those are two really good points I'd love to elaborate on if you don't mind. The first one about alcohol being a toxin, I think a lot of people don't know or don't understand this, and I didn't for a very long time either. When you feel that buzz or that drunk effect that you get from alcohol, that's actually a mild form of poisoning. That's what that is. You're putting a toxin into your body, and the response is a mild form of poisoning, or not so mild. If you go to an extreme, go on a binge, it's called alcohol poisoning because that's what it is. So just to elaborate on that a little bit, I don't think we tend to think of it that way or even know that that is what that effect is. I only learned that recently.
They used to use it as an anesthesia, but stopped because it was too dangerous.
That's powerful.
I mean, it's so powerful. And I didn't know that, that society big alcohol doesn't want us to know that. I just kind of see it, like, I look at it the same way as tobacco. Like the pretty parts are falling off there. The Marlboro Man used to be on the pages of magazines. He's not anymore. And I think that, sadly, I love the Clydesdales, but they probably need to go. They're beautiful, billion-dollar ads for a reason. But it was cool. Like, Heineken Zero was on the Super Bowl last year. That's huge.
It's gaining traction. To come back to your point about recovery, that's another, we talk as coaches about how important your nutrition is to your recovery, that when you finish your run within 30 to 60 minutes, you've got to get protein in your body to start repairing your muscles and repairing the damage so you can recover. Alcohol actually inhibits your ability to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So you are blocking your ability to absorb that protein and process it into your hardworking muscles. So when we finish a run and we have that celebratory drink, maybe once, twice a year after your big race, that's not a big deal. But if you're doing it after your long run, your group run, your pub run, however often it tends to pop up into your life, you're inhibiting muscle protein synthesis. So as an athlete, that's a big deal, especially when it becomes multiple times a week, or you're doing it before bed when your body is doing its biggest recovery work right before you go to sleep. I think that's huge. And then as women specifically, I think we talked a lot about you're losing muscle mass, that as early as your 30s, women are beginning to lose muscle mass. And we have to fight against that to stay sturdy, strong, healthy for a long period of time so that we're still out walking, playing with our grandkids in our older ages. And alcohol is going to interfere with that. So if you are putting in all of this hard work to strength train, eat well, run and take care of yourself for the purpose of maintaining your muscle mass, but then you're also adding alcohol as part of your regular routine, you're interfering with those goals and that process that you're trying to build. And I think, again, maybe that sort of direct and blunt messaging isn't understood. It's not something that we talk about or are educated on regularly. I'll be honest, these are all things that I didn't realize for myself until recently, until I started a similar journey as you, Aunt. You inspired me to take that journey myself. And those are not things I knew until then. It's not public knowledge. It's not out there.
Yeah, it's incredible when you start to do the research, what you find.
There's also a huge opportunity cost to having that drink right after, because like you have a window of time, like you said, 30 to 60 minutes to get something decent. And you're probably going to take that whole 30 to 60 minutes or close to it drinking a beer versus taking in the protein, because that's what you're focusing on, is having this, which is, you're not getting the electrolytes back in. You're actually depleting further on top of not having a protein shake or whatever else. And like you said, Lauren, like after a race, celebrate. You just spent like 6 months, but also understand that there's a cost to that celebration. Like, you finish this huge race and you're going to take your prime window and celebrate with a beer versus something that would help repair you or rehydrate you instead. So it's one of those, risk analyses you have to do to yourself when you have that. Is it worth it for a long run? Probably not. Is it worth it when you just PR'd something after 6 months of dedicated, determined training? Then yeah, maybe it's worth it. But it's something you need to weigh out when you take that.
Yeah, so I think
it's not like you wait 60 minutes and then have the beer. Like, okay, I've got my protein in, I've gotten some element, let me drink now. Right. Now I'll drink my beer. It doesn't usually occur that process.
Every race that I would pick races based on what beer was sponsoring them, right? Like Shamrock was Yingling, and
yeah.
Like I'm not, like the beer tent and the band was part of it, and so now now a lot of them really do have like athletic brewings everywhere. So a lot of them have athletic brewing or some other NA that you can have your carbohydrate drink without the poison, really, if you can still But another health related thing, before we get too far down the road, alcohol, and I'm going to use a word that like us ladies really can't stand. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but alcohol weakens your heart muscle so that it sags and stretches.
Wow.
and makes it impossible to contract efficiently. So I don't want a saggy,
is that like a permanent
heart.
effect, or is it like temporary? Like while you're like, what? I don't know.
I don't know. I would think it's probably permanent. It's to some extent, it's a muscle, so it's being damaged. But it's like, so that's like keeping you from transporting enough oxygen to your hearts and tissues, because it's pumping, but it's saggy and not able to contract. So you're not getting as much push, you're not getting as much blood flow. So, and it affects your stress hormones. It affects testosterone. It can cause hypertension. Like there's just so many detrimental effects that it has, the 30-day pre-event cleanup it's going to touch.
Wow.
Well, so let's touch on, we talked about sleep a little bit, and I think that's something we talk about often. I think it's more common knowledge how alcohol affects your sleep and your ability to get deep and REM sleep, which is where you're doing your biggest recovery work. If you have ever had even one drink and then looked at your sleep data and compared it against a night that you were dry, you can see the difference. It's very clear. Even in your poorest sleep tracker data, you can see it. Long term, again, that adds up. The more nights of quality sleep that you're getting build upon your recovery, your fitness, your long-term training status, your long-term health status. So that's important to note too. One other thing that I thought about is
before you
ahead.
move on from sleep, Lauren, sorry. The reason that you're waking up at 3:00 in the morning after you're having a couple glasses of wine or a couple beers is it's all glycogen related. It's a blood sugar crash. Mm-hmm. So alcohol compromises your body's ability to store glycogen. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
When I had a CGM on, that was the exact thing that I saw when I had wine. It was the exact opposite of it. It was like red line low, like 30, 40.
Yeah.
For like
and so you wake up.
Night. Yeah.
You wake up in a panic, and it's your blood sugar. It's a bomb.
It's crazy.
That's fascinating.
Go ahead.
Because we need, no, I'm glad you interrupted for that. We need that glycogen. Like that's a lot of the messaging we're putting is how to make sure your muscles are stored and full and ready to train the next day. And long term, again, glycogen storage again is sort of a long-term project, not just a day-to-day project. So that's huge. I'm sorry, you were talking about gut.
It wipes out your gut microbiome as well. So if you're plant-based and you're eating your 30 different plants a day per Dr. Will or per week, and you're trying to do all the variety in fiber and all that stuff, and then you take a couple shots or a Fireball or a IPA, you're wiping out your gut microbiome. It's alcohol. It's a sterilizer. Guess what? It kills the bugs.
The good stuff too.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be scary, but it's information that we need.
That's a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage from one substance.
Right. That it's like, and it's not controlled. It's, societally acceptable. It's, more addictive than, it's like sugar. It's more addictive than sugar. It's more addictive than cocaine. It's more addictive than heroin. It's proven to have this dopamine response, like all the bad guys, but it's just been the one that's been acceptable. So
one of the messages that I've really enjoyed seeing lately and appreciate, the messaging out there has said, like, alcohol is the one drug that if you don't do it, people wonder what's wrong with you. But I think that that's changing. I think that we are seeing people becoming more sober curious and non-alcoholic options becoming more interesting and more available. And it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. And I think that's awesome.
It's so hopeful. Yeah.
I want to, before we completely move on from the effects that it can have on you, what about like some indirect effects that alcohol might have on you? Like one of the top things that's top of my mind is your food choices. Like alcohol lowers your inhibitions, right? And so what kind of secondary effects might alcohol have on your total health and just the choices you've gone out for drinks, you come home, what are you going to do? Like snacks, and not the good ones, I'm sure. Well, you're reaching for the burger and the, we know.
When we first started working together, you had a clean eating Facebook page. Mm-hmm. So you were, and there was a little bit of nutrition conversation. Michelle, this was before Michelle was on the team and had the whole nutrition package. But we were, I can remember having conversations with you around, I like my beer. Can I still find a way to eat clean and have my beer? But beer came with potato chips. So I distinctly remember having conversations around.
Well, and not even that day.
This is going to happen.
I think, obviously maybe you have, even if it's like a glass, a lot of times we pair that with something, with chocolate, with cheese. So, like that day or that night, you're reaching for snacks that are maybe not your best choices. And again, your inhibitions are a little bit lower. So making the good choices is maybe a little more difficult. But then also the next day, it's also going to affect your appetite and the kind of things you reach for, especially if you're noticeably hungover, for sure. But even if maybe you've had a drink or two, you might notice that effect the next day too, is that you're eating differently than maybe you would if you hadn't had those drinks the night before. And so that, again, not only interfering with your training, but also just with your general health. And that's not even the alcohol directly, but just the choices you're making as a result of.
Hangover food.
Yeah.
Greasy cheeseburger and.
Yep.
I noticed the next
And
morning after drinking, I'm super hungry. I'm assuming it's probably from that blood crash. So like, I know for sure that second day I would normally do like a fasted easy run and not need to eat till, I don't know, like 10 a.m. It was like, I get at 5 a.m. and from 5 to 7, I'd be snacking. So like, how many extra calories over the course of, if you have one every day, is that? Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Plus the alcohol
not like
itself.
I come back later. It's all right. It's in addition to the normal food I'm eating. So I'm assuming, and you probably know better, that's probably from the blood sugar crashing.
I would probably, and like an indirect thing that could also lead to is people counting those calories and then not eating.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So like going into disordered eating because they want to keep their calories at a certain point. So they know that a Coors Light has 100 calories. So if they have 300 beers, then maybe they skip a meal, which like indirect, like that's pretty. And then
Nutrients
there's no nutrition
depleted.
going in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great point. So tell us a little bit more about where you have taken this journey. You started, so you are now, correct me if I'm wrong, 2.5, maybe more years alcohol free?
I am, like, coincidentally, we're recording on my 1,000th day.
Awesome.
Oh, wow.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and it's funny. I don't even really, like I said earlier, I don't think about alcohol so much. So I don't really count days per se, but I had put it in my calendar that would be a milestone that I would want to be aware of. So this weekend is 1,000 days alcohol free. So whatever that is in year, it was 2021, March 2021. Thanks.
That's
Thank
amazing.
You.
It was, if I remember correctly, it was like summer 2021. So
yeah, I think
a year,
mid-March,
2.5 years.
My last, yeah.
Oh, even earlier than that. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So now where have you taken that? Obviously you've got your personal journey, but you are also now doing coaching along these lines. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like I said, I went through a certification program with This Naked Mind to learn and teach their methodology. And it's all around mindset and sort of digging in and doing a little bit of self-work rather than, like, one of the big things that I like to say is that when you place blame, you take away all your power. So if you blame society or blame alcohol or blame your situation or blame whatever for, this thing that you want to stop, then you're giving all the power to all those things to have to change in order for you to change. So what I like to help people discover is how they can help themselves, just sort of find the tools that click for them and work with them to get to the place that they want to be, whether it's a permanent situation or whether it's a break. Like if you find yourself wanting to stop 30 days before an event and you're 4 days in and you are reaching for the glass of wine, then that's when I would love to be able to, have a conversation. I have a website, I have an Instagram account, and, I'm happy to talk to people and help anybody that's interested, with making, getting curious around alcohol.
And specifically in the endurance sport community, that's your community, and that's your cup of tea. So
Yeah, I would love to see the alcohol-free trail runner community grow. I think that there's a lot of um, stigma or a lot of like association. Like if you're a trail runner, then you're a drinker. Or and I don't. I think that there are probably a lot of us hiding behind the trees. Not drinking, and I would just like to to be able to come out and be let the non-drinkers be a part of the community. I think that there's no us and them. I think that like I said, with the pub runs, hanging out with your NA beer is just as fun, and you can be as much of a part of the conversation as with your extra exclusive IPA. So yeah, just helping people get comfortable around that.
So if people are interested in some support and some help and community, where can they find you?
Sure. So my website is stepintoself, all one word, .adventures.com. And that's the same as my Instagram account. So stepintoself.adventures.com. And the adventures part, I think I'm gonna start to have some like alcohol-free trail running events, maybe just to get people comfortable. It's a safe place to come out and not feel like they have to have a beer after the run. You don't have to be alcohol free to attend, but just a place to go and know that there won't be any around that you would be tempted to have. So yeah.
So we will link all of your contact in the show notes for those of you who need a place to click instead of remembering all of that. Stepintoself.adventures.com.
Yeah.
And on Instagram, you are Step Into Self Adventures.
I think there's a dot in there too. We'll make it in the show notes. We'll make it clear. My and my personal account is @Banana Files. So if you want to go there, there's a link tree in that bio for dogs and running related shenanigans @Banana Files.
You might have seen her featured on our Instagram page too, all of the adventures you've been on this year. We kind of glazed over that, but you have done some big stuff this year too. Can you just real quick wrap us up with big accomplishments that you've had this year? Can you just run us through?
It's been fun. Yeah, this year's been fun. I set out, like I said, I was doing 50s for 50s, and I'm in my 55th year. So I had on the plan 5 50Ks in 5 ways, I think was the plan. And I have 4. So I feel accomplished. Going from not ever wanting to do a marathon to having quarterly greater than 50K mileage events is pretty cool. I did a 4-state challenge, which is on the Appalachian Trail. You start with your feet in Pennsylvania, traverse the entire mileage in Maryland, cross the little section of West Virginia, and finish with your feet in Virginia. So you hit 4 states. We did that in April.
I wanna highlight that one real quick because that's very similar to the 50-mile hike that you did 6 years ago when someone asked you, "Are you going to run that?" And you said, "No way. There's no way I would do that." So you did it in 3 nights instead. This year, you did it as a run in a day, less than a day. Mostly daylight.
Yep.
That's
and
cool.
then, and thank you for helping me finish that one. We had a little adventure with Lauren trying to find the state line sign. So that was fun.
It was dark.
It was dark. I was grumpy. The next one was the Damn Yeti 55K in June. Mm-hmm. And then I took a little mental health break over the summer. I had some life stress happen, and that was when I was going to do another 50-mile backpacking trip, and that just didn't come together. But we pulled our act together enough to get on the starting line for the JFK 50-miler and got 39 miles out of that. So that was greater than 50K. I'm missing one. What am I missing?
Your last one. You just did last weekend.
Oh, I did the Damn Yeti, or the Yeti 24-hour challenge. So it's every 4 hours you do 5.2 miles. So in a 24-hour period. So you get 50K in a day. So yeah. I forgot because it's still, I'm blacking it out.
The year's not quite over yet, so we'll see what happens here with that fifth.
Take a long walk next week.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Anne. This has been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. Again, some really personal points along your journey that it's been helpful and informative for you to share all of that with us. So thank you.
Well, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks you're an inspiration. All of you are. You've all been a part of my, be inspired by the community. So I appreciate being a part of the squad.
Right back at
more
you,
miles, more miles to go, right?
We have more miles to go. All right. So you can find us at moremilestogo.com. You can learn about what we do as coaches and each of the coaches individually. You can find this and all episodes of the podcast on Spotify as well on Spotify at the More Miles podcast. Everywhere else, you can find us at More Miles Run Coaching on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And we are going to link where you can find Anne in the show notes at Step Into Self Adventures. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks.